The first history of all civilizations is a myth. Myth and religion are closely related, which is a fact that no one can deny. But what kind of relationship is it? Which came first, myth or religion? Is myth derived from religion, or is religion derived from myth? Or is it, as some comrades did not long ago when they discussed this question, that primitive mythology and primitive religion stem from the same ideological unity? Our answer is not that myth came first, nor that religion came from myth, nor that both myth and religion come from the same ideological unity, but that religion came first, and myth came from religion. Only by understanding this simple and clear fact can the correct answer be found in the evolutionary relationship between myth and religion. Marx said, in the lower stages of barbarism. Imagination, which has so much influence on human development, began at this time in the unrecorded literature of myth, legend, and has already exerted a powerful influence on mankind. This is a clear classical indication of the origin of myth. As for the origin of religion, it is even earlier. Engels, in The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, referring to the characteristics of the various American Indians, also said that they had a common religious idea, myth, and liturgy. Their myths have so far been far from critical study, they have given their religious image all the human appearance that the various elves have given them, but they are still in the lower stage of barbarism and do not know statues, so-called idols. It is a worship of nature and spontaneity on the way to polytheism. Not only does this also indicate that we had myths in the lower stages of barbarism in primitive society, but it also implies that the origin of our religion predates mythology, so that in the mythology of the various American Indians, the image of their own religion give human appearance. Although religion predates myth, if man has existed on the earth for 1,000,000 years, there has been no religion for at least 900,000 years before 100,000 years ago. It was only in this period from 40,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, in the middle stage of the obscurantist period, as Marx and Engels referred to it by Morgan's staging method in Ancient Society, in other words, in the period of the ancient clan communes of the Paleolithic age of the new staging method, that primitive religious ideas began to emerge. Marx said that, the progress of the potential of the obscurantist is great, there are already the seeds of language, administration, family, religion, architecture, property, and the term religion refers to this. The bourgeois scholars of the past defined religion as if it were inherent to man and that man had come into being together with religion, which is utter nonsense. The idea of religion arises only when labor promotes the development of the human mind to such an extent that it is able to imagine, to form more complex imaginings and associations, and before that no religious idea can arise. Primitive peoples' religious ideas were formed when the productive forces of primitive society developed to a certain stage, but it is also a reflection that the development of the productive forces of primitive society is still at a low level. Primitive men in the struggle with nature, feel their own weakness, feel the fear of nature, produced the embryonic religious concept. For example, when primitive man saw such terrible natural phenomena as storms, lightning and thunder, and forest fires burning, he was amazed without explanation, and thus brought religious colors to his consciousness of amazement. The idea of primitive man's embryonic state is not yet what Taylor calls animism. Animism means that everything has a soul, and primitive people would not have such a profound religious concept at the beginning. Primitive man's first religious ideas. If we explain the so-called spirit of animism in this way, we approach the essence of the problem. As for the idea of the soul, it was gradually acquired from the primitive man's false understanding of man's death. You don't even know the difference between life and death. Later in a hunt for prey, the partner was injured, bleeding, crying in pain, but after a while he did not respond, you know not to bleed. Another time, you have not eaten for several days, and when the sun rises, several of your companions fail to wake up as usual, you know not to starve. Later you learn more, such as, not to get cold, not to eat unclean food, not to leave the cave alone at night, because these can lead to never waking up. In the days after the death of your best brother, you always dream of seeing him coming towards you. Therefore, when you wake up, you imagine that there is a soul in the body, and when the person dies, the soul leaves the body, but the soul may be able to return to the body and revive the dead. Therefore, based on this false religious concept, the first religious rituals such as burying the dead and martyrdom appeared. At this time, the understanding of nature is not only limited to all things are moving living creatures, but all things have a soul, which is the primitive people's initial anthropomorphism of various things in nature, thinking that the natural things around them can do harm to people for good, resulting in the worship of nature, becoming primitive fetishism. Fire, water, sun, moon, stones, trees, cows, snakes, etc., may be the objects of their worship. The seas, mountains of 5 classics, the narrative of various blame god beast, the sea through the fire ravaged by narrative, water river, Siyugua, Yu Beijing, the sun god Dong Jun and cloud god Yun Zhong Jun described in Ci of Chu 9 songs, the sea bird love house that urged Zhang Wenzhong to sacrifice in Guoyu Lu described in Guoyu, the big stone, boulder worship, set up by the epitaph of Wuding, Huayongguizhi, and so on. Although it has evolved, there are still signs of nature worship in primitive societies. Your tribe also has an object of worship, and that is the wolf. Because you live in the grassland and hunt sheep for a living, and wolves, as strong team hunters on the grassland, can always get food smoothly, and tribal people are also eager to have such a powerful force, so they both fear and worship wolves, and the appearance of wolves will naturally become the totem of your tribe. Later, your descendants led the tribe to grow, conquer nature, the strength is more than the wolves, and began to domesticate them. When the wolf became dog, some people in the tribe began to believe that the dog on the totem, because it is a good partner of human beings, and even saved the lives of tribal children. In the tribal era of half-blood group marriage, people often do not know the father and do not understand the relationship between sexual behavior and fertility, so they think that female fertility is endowed by the totem, which is the totem into the only child, and then produce a child. The rise of the myth of induction also began at this time. Totemism is one of the organic components of primitive people's religious concept. In the emergence of matriarchal clans and societies, totemism began. At that time, people established social organizations around the maternal line, lived in certain areas to hunt and gather wild fruits, because of the religious ideas mentioned above, but also because of the practical needs of specific social and economic life, such as the clan living next to you, who lived at the foot of the snowy mountains, and had a lot of bamboo shoots every spring, which they exchanged for your wool. So bamboo shoots were very important to them, and over time they became their totem. People in primitive society lived in different environments, so they had different production objects, processed different production objects, and based on this, they had different divisions of labor. Therefore, they naturally believed that a certain animal or plant deeply bound to the tribe was of great significance and took it as their clan totem. The belief that clan members are related to the animal or plant identified as a totem. Thus, the religious rituals of totem worship and the provisions for protecting totem plants and animals in the area to prevent them from being harmed or occupied by foreign races were produced. Most of the totems of the clan are animals, followed by plants, and a few are natural phenomena or the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers. For example, the first totem of the Fuxi clan was the snake. As one of the most powerful clans in China, the snake totem constantly conquered and merged with other clans and tribes, and the snake totem constantly merged with other totems, accepting the 4 legs of the beast, the hair of the horse, the tail of the iguana, the horns of the deer, the claws of the dog, the scales of the fish and the back of the beard, and gradually evolved into the dragon. After the fusion of the western, northern and southern tribes had a common dragon totem, in order to better manage this unified tribe, the Fuxi system was divided into Changlong, Qianlong, Zhurong, Jianglong, Shanglong Shuilong, Qinglong, Qilong and Bailong. It is hard to imagine that the ugly snake and worm that once crawled on the ground had experienced what kind of arduous struggle before finally achieving extraordinary achievements. To be able to fly in the air one day and travel for 9 days. Through the comparative study of totems and ancient books, the gods and people with the characteristics of human head and snake body, such as Candle Dragon, Gonggong, Fuxi, Nuwa, Yen Di, and Huang Di, may come from the same tribe in different times. In addition to the dragon snake, the Eastern group has another totem symbol, phoenix bird. Just as the dragon is a snake myth, phoenix is also a bird mythological form. The literature about phoenix totem is more abundant. With dragon and phoenix as the main totems, the Eastern and Western tribal alliance experienced a long period of brutal war, plunder and slaughter, and gradually integrated and unified. In the classic of mountains and seas. Another integral part of primitive religion is magic or witchcraft. Witchcraft believes that there is an invisible connection and influence between man and nature, that individual natural phenomena may affect man, and in turn, man can use various means to control the harmful forces of nature to man and the spontaneous harmful phenomena among humans. All the rituals of primitive religion are full of witchcraft. At first, the scope of witchcraft was man against nature, and later it expanded to man against man, group against group, and individual against individual. At the beginning, the witchcraft rituals were chaotic and violent, and at the same time included songs, dances, plays, paintings, incantations, totems, myths, costumes, instruments, and so on. They are primitive human beings who distinguish spiritual production from material production. It's a voodoo ritual and a primitive song and dance. It is not the simple entertainment and relaxation and arbitrary stretch of primitive people in their spare time, but the continuation of totem activities. As a serious sorcery, the function is prayer. The most common form of witchcraft is incantation, the belief that the power of words can influence nature and defeat enemies. From our ancient records, we can see the direct narration of witchcraft, such as 6 Towers, recorded. Jiang Taigong painted the image of Ding Ho and shot it to make him sick. The power of the spell can also be seen, such as the mountains and seas. The great wilderness north recorded that the drought will bring drought to the place over the run. The demon spell, God to the north, thought, the drought immediately fled, followed by heavy rain. We can also see the records of the use of witchcraft from mythology, such as the war between the Yellow Emperor and Qiyu as the fog, the Wind Boyu division, the wind and rain, the Yellow Emperor with the dragon skin as the drum, blowing horns as the dragon singing, to identify the location. These magic powers of Qiyu are actually the epitome of ancient witchcraft. The development of primitive religion to the stage of the prevalence of witchcraft shows that primitive man, although in fact still ignorant and weak, had in their thoughts and concepts the desire to control nature and defeat the enemy by various illusory means, and this desire was manifested in 2 directions, one through witchcraft rituals and the other through myths and legends. There is a fundamental difference between witchcraft and myth. This is because the mode adopted by witchcraft, which is completely impossible to achieve its purpose, is completely idealistic, and its emergence and popularity are enough to illustrate the folly of the people of that era. The development of witchcraft can only become a pure deception of people. While myth, although also with a strong color of fantasy and imagination, but the fantasy of myth often become the precursor of scientific creation and invention. Myth, its tone is really materialistic. What is a myth? Gorky said, myth is a reflection of natural phenomena, the struggle against nature, and social life in a broad artistic generalization. This shows that the creation of myths is also based on real life, and not out of the imagination of the human mind. Gorky tells us more clearly, it is extremely difficult to imagine a two-legged animal struggling for its existence with all its strength as a human being thinking abstractly away from the process of labor, from the problems of clans and tribes. This shows that the emergence of myths is closely related to real life. Therefore, when we study the origin of mythology, the specific meaning of the myths of each period of antiquity, and so on, we must not conjecture in isolation from the real life, labor, and struggle of man at that time. Let us now examine the origin of myth. In the history of social development, the primitive man in the first semi-animal state worked collectively and distributed equally. Although there was no exploitation of man here, the primitive man was the slave of nature. Overwhelmed by poverty and the difficulties encountered in the struggle for survival, the mind is unable to separate itself from the surrounding nature and form any abstract ideas. Later, when man in the practice of existence, with 2 hands to teach the mind, then a more intelligent mind to teach the 2 hands, intelligent hands again more powerful to promote the development of the mind, in this long process of movement, the primitive began to fantasize about the existence of gods and magic in the world around him. They correspond this mental illusion to the phenomena which occur in nature, especially those which arouse their amazement. Such as wind and rain, thunder and lightning, the burning of forest fires, the movement of the sun and the moon, the magic of the rainbow clouds and so on. Think of them as living things, as gods in charge of magic. They not only regard the sun, the moon, etc., as gods, but also worship all kinds of animals and plants, even creatures as small as grasshoppers, as gods, which is an upgraded version of totem worship. Out of these obscurantist ideas arose primitive religions and primitive myths, which were created by the increasingly intelligent minds of primitive man, developed through labor, and which were a reflection of the low productive forces of primitive society. On the one hand, because primitive society is a society in which no man exploits man, on the other hand, because of the low productivity of primitive society, primitive people have been persecuted for a long time by the difficulties of survival and the difficulties of fighting against nature, and in order to overcome these difficulties, they have repeatedly sung songs about labor and labor heroes in a passionate and exciting tone. They praised Pangu, who broke the earth with an axe, Nuwa, who created man and refined 5-colored stones to repair the sky, Surin, who drilled wood to make fire, Shenong, who discovered herbs, Wanghai, who domesticated animals, Huji, who taught the people how to plant crops, Gun and Yu, who controlled floods. These labor heroes who conquer nature and improve human life are the most revered by people. In addition, from the myth, we can also see how the children of the gods used cattle to plow the fields, how they invented tools for agricultural labor, how they created cars and boats, how they made bows and arrows and other weapons to resist the enemy, and some of them created music, songs and dances, and made various wonderful musical instruments. The creation and invention in these legends are the sustenance of people's wisdom and labor in ancient times. With the collapse of the primitive commune system and the emergence of private property, the phenomenon of social division into classes and exploitation of man appeared. At this time, mankind has entered a new and long era, the era of class antagonism. In class society, the exploiters of labor use the energy of the masses as fodder for production and ruthlessly exploit the labor of the people. In their fantasy, therefore, there is a desire to ease labor. A long time ago, people have dreamed of flying in the air, so there is the flying carpet story. People dream of speeding up the speed of walking, so there are stories of fast boots. This is a foreign myth. In our mythology, there are more vivid stories of the long arm country, the flying car of the Chilu country, Yu who controlled the water and turned into a bear to break through the Huanyuan mountain, the 7 fairy sisters weaving 10 pieces of cloud brocade in one night, and so on, which show that the emergence of these simple fantasies has its profound significance. The laborers in ancient times created gods who could serve as models of labor, only to inspire their enthusiasm for labor. Later, when the classes were divided, the ruling class took these heroes of labor as their ancestors and lifted them up to the 9-fold heavens. Some became gods, some became majestic gods, and let the slaves prostrate themselves at their feet to worship them, to paralyze the resistance of the masses, and to play a role of intimidation and repression. This is why, for thousands of years, God has been present in the daily lives of working people for so long. Although God rose higher in heaven because the slaveholders had more authority, there was also a will among the masses to rebel against God. The concrete expression of this will is that the genius of the people has created a god that rebelled against God. In Greece there was Prometheus, in China there was Yi, who shot the sun, Gun, who stole God's breath to control the flood, and you, who carried on his work. If you want to expand the ranks of the traitors, those giants in ancient times, Chiyu, Quafu and Torture Day, pulled up the anti-character flag, and the ruler quarrel, but also have the spirit of death rather than surrender. Heroic myths like these reflect the struggle between the ruled class and the ruling class of class society, so we can say that the world of man is projected to the world of God, and myths can be regarded as human words in essence. From the above facts, we can clearly see that, in essence, myth, like other arts, reflects a certain social life, is a superstructure created on a certain social basis, and is an art as an ideological form. In our next post, we will go into the story of Chinese mythology. Thank you for your subscribe and follow.